Welcome back to Signal Shift with me, Rocky. It's time for the solo episode of the month. And today I wanted to talk about signals in the realm of spirituality, religion, the afterlife, and how AI intersects with these areas. It's really the ultimate crossover, right? Kind of ancient teachings and artificial intelligence. So I do want to talk about two different groups of signals and concepts in this area, but I'm going to suspect that I won't be able to fit it all into one podcast. So it may have to be split for this month and next month. Let's see. But first up, let's talk about Robo-Clergy. So for as long as we all know, remember, history is recorded, right? There's always been this bridge between us as humans and the divine. And that has been facilitated by priests, rabbis, imams, some sort of middleman, right? That comes in and facilitates that relationship. And in some ways, in recent and modern times, that bridge has been steadily and slowly, very slowly collapsing, or at least really changing dramatically, right? New Age spirituality, rise of atheism, alternative churches and religions, right? Changing the very landscape of how we practice religion and spirituality. What happens though? What happens to spirituality when the small, still voice of God, right? When that starts to sound like an algorithm. Now, many religions, all religions, I think, have been experimenting with chatbots and AI in the last few years. Some fascinating developments in this space. So one of the signals I want to talk about today is in Japan. Kyoto University, in collaboration with the tech ventures called Terraverse and Xnova, have unveiled an AI integrated robot monk called the Buddharoid. And I have to say, I find that such a catchy name. Buddharoid sounds really cool to me personally. But Buddhism in Japan, as other religions in other places, as I've stated, is facing challenges, is facing questions from younger generations, and certainly a decline, if not a decline, at least a shift, right, in perception brought into the Buddharoid is now being brought in to support the Buddhist clergy to prevent this kind of decline and to bring back young people and to be able to facilitate better, deeper answers to some really big questions. They're actually using a specialized generative AI based off of OpenAI's ChatGPT, and it's called BuddhaBot Plus. The system has been trained on Buddhist scriptures and teachings, and this robot can give you advice based on Buddhist scriptures on any personal or social issues that you're facing, the same way you would approach a monk or a priest. Now, this is an actual robot, right? The robot itself is designed to mimic the specific movements of a monk, okay? So it's got a very slow gait, puts his hands together in prayer, it'll kind of sit cross-legged the way a monk would. It bows, so it's got all of that. And those things, those subtleties are so important, right? To create the sense that this robot moves and creates a kind of trust that we as humans need to see it like we would a monk and to approach it like a monk, right? So that's really important. And they've done a really good job with that. This is not entirely new concept, right, in Japan. It is in fact as early as 2019 that another temple in Japan set up an adult-sized robot called Mindar, okay, to preach sermons for them. This robot was modeled after Kannon Bodhisattva, the Buddhist goddess of mercy. It's 2019 stage robot, so it does look different to Buddharoid, and it not only preaches sermons, but it would do things like project images and sounds and create this sort of immersive experience for people in the temple as well. Now in India, on a smaller scale, there's Gita GPT, right? And it's not the only one. Within Hinduism, there are many different gods, right? Krishna, Shiva, and so there are many different AI systems, right, that are meant to really represent that god. And so Hinduism lends itself very interestingly to AI, right? And systems that utilize AI, because you can really create this persona, because deities have their own personality, right? Characteristics. There's mythology and stories behind them, similar to kind of Greek mythology, right? Gita GPT is one very popular version of that. It's based on the Hindu scriptures, the Bhagavad Gita, which is really one of the key foundational big, right, like 700 verses of dialogue. It was already plus million queries at some point in time, and that number's probably a lot bigger now. So it's very interesting to see the adoptions, and there's a few others, right? Talk to Him is an AI-powered chatbot that simulates conversations with Jesus. And then this is an old signal that we actually shared a long time ago, but St. Peter's Chapel in Switzerland, I think it was in Lucerne, they set up a confession booth and they had an AI Jesus avatar in the confession booth. And so people could share your confessions to the avatar. It was a short installation. It was done, I think, in collaboration with one of the universities. It was an experiment, but I think it was a very, I'm not going to say well received, I'm going to say high turnout. People who wanted to experiment, right? A lot of people had positive things to say. Of course, a lot of people online were like, this is not okay. But I think the people who used the chatbot had a good experience, and it was a big number of people. It was about 900 people who turned up, and it didn't just converse with them in German, which was the majority sort of language for that group, but it spoke in other languages. And so you had people from other faiths and other denominations, and just people speaking other languages who could interact with this avatar. Religions across the board are experimenting with technology, with artificial intelligence, and what is its role and what space does it play within religion, right, and within spirituality. And then there's even the way of the future church, right? It was started by a former Google engineer, and what that is trying to do, or that church is trying to do, is to develop and promote the realization of God based on artificial intelligence. So that's a very out there concept. Webb Keen is a professor of anthropology at the University of Michigan. So in the book called Animals, Robots, God's Adventures in Moral Imagination. And he explains the concept of the matter human. It's someone or something with superior powers, but it lacks a body or a particular social location, is how he describes it. It's not a new concept. That's what gods and spirits and deities and angels are, right? But now we're extending it to robots. These are all entities that possess knowledge, power, and moral authority beyond the human, right? So I think this is the beginnings of Robo-Clergy. So things to think about here, right, is there's the positive side of this, literally is, which is that this is a great way to learn about religion, to learn and break down complicated texts and scriptures and get through a lot of volume in an easy, simple manner. It's good to have support and motivation easily accessible, just like we've said, about virtual therapy. It's giving people who may not have had access, or the forms of availability of that support don't work for people, right? And for those who don't fit in with traditional forms of worship, or they don't like mass gatherings, or just haven't built that relationship with a spiritual leader, maybe they're more of an introvert, whatever it is, they have a belief in God, but they can't foster that in the way we have socialized how our relationship with God should be, right? It doesn't work for them. And that's part of what I think we see with these generational shifts and how different generations want to interact with this concept of God. And so, the relationship with God is very personal, it's very private. And now you have this system that says, okay, there's no gatekeeping God, right? You can develop that personal, private relationship. It's good in the sense that it makes religion actually more accessible to more people. Another thing, a very important thing to consider here, is that in light of the shady spiritual and religious leaders we have seen in our time, and I'm talking about the abuse by priests, I'm talking about so many spiritual gurus just falling from their pedestals, and I mean, there are countless stories, right? I mean, there are so many stories like this. It's far too common an occurrence. And most recently, even spiritual leaders, people like Deepak Chopra, falling from grace. And really, I think what's happening is we're at a time where we are questioning all types of authority, but also spiritual authority and religious authority, and really saying, gosh, these people who are meant to lead us are not just flawed, but we're looking at it and saying, whoa, are you a hypocrite? Are you simply bad or even evil, right? Is everything you espouse just a mask, right? Is it just a pretense? And at this time where we have AI that isn't human, and maybe because it isn't human, does it make the perfect spiritual or religious leader? Because it's not flawed, it's not going to have scandals, it's not going to age, it won't die. Your entire family can have the same spiritual leader for your entire family lineage. So there's all of that. And AI is biased, but is that still the closest to sort of this unbiased, really objective middleman in our connection to the divine? What's really interesting as well is the cultural side of that, and that is that some countries have a more scientific, have a more mechanistic, some would even say a colder approach to religion and spirituality. I think maybe cultures in the East, like Japan, like India, whereas, and again, this is from my very limited understanding and knowledge, whereas in the West, sort of community-driven spiritual gatherings being really important, right? That's a key part of how religion is practiced and exercised. And yeah, it's interesting to say which cultures, which religions AI can work within, and maybe in certain ones it doesn't, right? Of course, some of the negative, concerning, worrying things is that, AI is going to misinterpret these texts. AI is going to hallucinate as it does until that is solved for, and give truly bad advice. Now, AI is already problematic and has already literally caused deaths, okay, of children, teens. Now, if you're getting advice and it seems like it's coming from God, you're going to follow that advice, even if it's truly bad advice. So it's really dangerous, really, really dangerous in that sense, right? And the truth is that the line between support and toxic dependency is very thin and can be very, very dangerous, right? Both in our relationships with AI and with humans. So we always have to watch for that. And of course, religious texts are contextual, they are metaphorical. So, can a mathematical model, can a language model, and it's in the spirit of what those texts mean, is that something only a human can do? Maybe only a human, through very lived human experiences, has the ability to actually be that middleman, and share what the true meaning of these texts are, and not just the literal meaning of these texts. I think the big question here is, will we respect, and be drawn to human religious and spiritual leaders in the future? With AI there, maybe offering a better relationship, better knowledge, better understanding. Does that either ways change the draw of religious and spiritual leaders? Not just that alone, but everything we've spoken about, right? This point in time where we are questioning all types of authority, question about us reckoning with religious and spiritual leaders and what they mean in our life. And then the separate question of, well, does AI fill that void? Does that void need to be filled? What is that going to look like? We may see things like pressure, probably from different churches and religious institutions on governments, to ban the use of this kind of technology when it comes to religious practices. And I think that question that we all will probably sit with, right, is that if a machine doesn't have a soul, can it actually guide my soul? And if this digital avatar never dies, can it truly understand and advise me and guide me as this human who will inevitably die, who has to grapple with that truth and that reality? Should I be getting spiritual advice from you, right? I think those are questions we all are going to be thinking about. So that's one aspect of spirituality, right? How we kind of practice religion in today's times. But the other topic that I wanted to touch on today was this concept of digital immortality, or the AI afterlife. This is looking at our relationship with the end of life, which traditionally fell in the domain of kind of faith and spirituality and religion. And so it kind of fits in with that topic. But I do not think I'm going to have time to cover that too. So I think we'll leave that for the next solo episode in a month's time after our guest interviews. I personally really love delving into some of these questions that can't really be answered, can they? But they're still really interesting to discuss, because I think in raising these questions and talking about them with your family or friends, we learn certain things about ourselves and our beliefs and the world around us that we often don't take time to think about. We kind of just status quo, and then we reflect on these meta questions, I guess, and it sheds light on things and ways we think. It's always fun to do that. So what are you thinking? What are your thoughts? Have you used any of these religious AI tools, chatbots, systems? Have you interacted with something like the Buddharoid? Because I definitely want to go to Japan to experience Buddharoid and Mindar as well, and kind of see what it's about at some point. I'd love to know your thoughts, and we will see you again next week. Thanks so much for being here. Bye for now.